My mother, the woman who called me for 9 months and claimed she loved all her children equally, looked me dead in the eye in the lobby of the Workport Hotel in Houston, Texas. Welcome, my trainer. I have a new story for you today. Listen.
2 weeks before my wedding, my parents sat on my fiancé's imported leather sofa and told him I had been hiding a secret child. My father, Richard, leaned forward, gripping his knees. She is a liar. Always has been. Julian did not blink. He sat back in his armchair and looked at them. I know. My parents exchanged a look, a spark of triumph. They thought they had won. Then Julian finished his sentence. I know that you made it up, and I have the private investigator's full report right here. He slid a thick manila folder across the glass coffee table. The heavy paper scraped against the glass. The color drained from my father's face. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Before I tell you exactly how my fiancé dismantled my parents' lies, let me ask you a question. Has your family ever tried to sabotage your happiness just to keep you in your place? If you understand what that feels like, hit the like button and subscribe to Luke Revenge Start. Also, let me know your age and where you are watching from in the comments. To understand how we ended up in this living room standoff, we have to rewind 2 weeks. My name is Alda Lopez. I'm 32 years old and I work as an events director at a luxury resort in Maui. My life here is quiet. I spend my days coordinating oceanfront galas and my evenings on the Laie with Julian. We were deep into planning our own $40,000 wedding. Everything felt secure until my phone rang on a Tuesday evening. My mother Sylvia did not say hello. She bypassed small talk the way she always did when she needed something. Alda, we have a family emergency. Her voice held that tight, familiar edge. I set my wine glass on the counter. The condensation left a wet ring on the dark granite. What is wrong? It is Vanessa. My mother took a sharp intake of breath, a sound meant to signal profound burden. Your sister is in over her head. Credit cards. Alda. The banks are threatening to sue her and garnish her wages. She needs $40,000 by Friday or she loses everything. I closed my eyes. Vanessa was my younger sister, the golden child who never heard the word no. Growing up, my parents emptied my college savings to fund her luxury lifestyle. I spent my 20s working double shifts to pay off student loans, while Vanessa drove a sports car my father leased for her. I am sorry she is dealing with that, I said, keeping my tone even. But I do not have $40,000 lying around. My mother paused. The silence stretched thick and heavy through the receiver. You have the wedding fund. My stomach dropped. You want me to cancel my wedding to pay Vanessa's credit card debt? It is just a party, Alda. My father's voice cut in on speakerphone. He sounded breathless, agitated. You and Julian can go to the courthouse. Family comes first. We need this money right now. I listened to the strain in his voice. My parents lived in a gated community. They played golf on Sundays. They maintained a pristine facade of country club wealth. Yet here they were, begging for my wedding money with a desperation that felt raw and strangely panicked. It did not make sense. No, I said. The word tasted foreign. I am not canceling my wedding to fix Vanessa's mistakes. Not this time. The line went dead quiet. When my mother finally spoke, her voice was ice. If you are going to be this selfish, you do not deserve a wedding at all. Do not expect us to attend. The dial tone hummed against my ear. They had drawn a line in the sand. But as I stood in my kitchen listening to the ocean outside, I felt a cold knot forming in my chest. My parents never just walked away when they were denied. They always made sure I paid the price. I just did not know yet what they were willing to do to get that money. 3 days passed since I refused to fund my sister's debt. The silence for my parents felt heavy, like the thick humidity before a tropical storm rolls across the island. Julian and I tried to maintain our normal routine. We woke up early, we drank our coffee on the Laie, watching the Pacific turn from gray to bright blue. but the peace felt fragile. Julian is a wealth manager for high net worth clients. His phone is always buzzing with market alerts and emails. That Thursday morning, I noticed a shift. He was scrolling through his notifications when his thumb stopped. His jaw tightened. The muscle near his temple twitched. He locked the screen and placed the phone face down on the glass table. When I asked if everything was all right with work, he forced a smile and blamed a fluctuating portfolio. I poured more coffee, pretending to believe him. I did not know that the sabotage had already begun. That afternoon, I sat at our dining table reviewing paperwork for the wedding. We needed to update our life insurance policies and emergency contacts. Staring at the blank beneficiary forms, a strange memory surfaced. It was a detail I had buried for a decade. I was 22 years old, fresh out of college, and applying for my first corporate benefits package. The underwriter had sent a rejection letter. I remembered holding the crisp white envelope in my parents' kitchen. The letter cited a discrepancy regarding the week-long admission at a rural medical clinic. I had never been to a rural clinic. I had barely left our zip code that year. I remembered showing the letter to my father. Richard had snatched the paper from my hand so fast his coffee spilled across the counter. His face flushed tight red. He told me it was a clerical error, a mix-up with someone else who shared my name. He promised to call the agency and handle it. When I tried to ask questions, he snapped at me, his voice sharp and commanding. He told me never to bring it up again because it would only cause unnecessary stress. Growing up, my parents often handled my administrative tasks, treating me as if I were too incompetent to manage my own affairs. I was conditioned to comply. I let it go. Sitting in my beautiful Maui home 10 years later, a cold shiver traced my spine. The memory felt different now. It did not feel like a father protecting his daughter from a bureaucratic headache. It felt like a cover-up. My unease deepened when Julian returned home from his office that evening. He loosened his tie, poured a glass of sparkling water, and leaned against the kitchen island. He looked at me with an expression I could not read. It was not anger. It was an intense, quiet observation. He told me he ran into my sister in Wa during his lunch break. The resort town is small, but Vanessa never left her side of the island unless she was shopping. Julian explained that she intercepted him outside a cafe. She bought him an espresso, sat him down, and put on a performance. According to Julian, Vanessa looked exhausted. She played the role of the burdened, protective sister to perfection. She told him she was worried about our upcoming wedding. She sighed deeply and stirred her drink, whispering that I had a lot of hidden baggage. She told Julian she just wanted me to be happy after everything I had put the family through. I stood frozen in the kitchen, gripping the edge of the marble counter. My sister was spinning a narrative out of thin air. Vanessa even had the audacity to play the ultimate victim. She told Julian she never got to live her 20s because she was always cleaning up my messes. I felt the blood rush to my ears. It was a staggering reversal of reality. While I worked back-to-back shifts at a hotel front desk to pay off my student loans, Vanessa was flying to Europe on our parents' credit cards. She was the one who crashed cars. She was the one who dropped out of 3 different college programs. Yet, there she was, sitting in a sunlit cafe, painting me as a damaged, reckless liability. I asked Julian how he responded to her. He took a sip of his water. He told me he just listened. He did not defend me. He did not call her a liar. He simply thanked her for the coffee and walked away. His neutral reaction terrified me. Julian was a logical, analytical man. He dealt in facts and risk assessment. If someone presented him with a warning, he would investigate it. My parents knew this about him. They were not trying to pick a screaming fight. They were planting seeds of doubt, watering them with vague warnings and waiting for the roots to crack the foundation of our relationship. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab his shoulders and shake him, demanding he see through her manipulation. But the conditioning of my childhood held me back. If I reacted with too much emotion, I would only prove Vanessa right. I would look unstable. I swallowed my panic, nodded carefully, and changed the subject to our dinner plans. The true weight of their psychological warfare hit me the next afternoon. Julian had gone to the golf course with a client. I was cleaning up the house, gathering stray coffee cups, and organizing the mail. I walked into his home office to return a pen to his desk. The room smelled of cedar and the faint trace of his cologne. His laptop was closed. His chair was pushed in. Everything was meticulously organized except for a single piece of printer paper resting on the output tray of his laser printer. I did not mean to snoop. The bold black text caught my eye from across the room. I stepped closer. My heart hammered. Against my ribs, a frantic warning rhythm. It was a printed screenshot of a direct message sent to Julian on a professional networking site. The sender profile was blank. A ghost account. The message consisted of a single chilling paragraph. You are making a mistake. You do not know the real Alda Lopez. She is keeping a secret that will ruin your life. Ask her what she did. Ask her why her family really had to bail her out. Do your research before you sign a marriage license with a sociopath. The air vanished from the room. My knees weakened, and I had to place my hand flat against the heavy oak desk to stay upright. The words blurred together as tears stung my eyes. Sociopath secret. Bail her out. The lies were escalating from vague coffee shop whispers to direct calculated digital harassment. Someone in my family had created a fake profile just to hunt down my fiancé in his professional sphere. But the most terrifying part was not the message itself. The most terrifying part was the fact that Julian had printed it. Why would he print an anonymous threat? Was he building a file? Was his analytical mind gathering evidence to confront me? He had not mentioned this message to me. He had kept it hidden. He told me about Vanessa at the coffee shop, but he withheld this digital attack. The silence between us suddenly felt vast and treacherous. I stared at the paper, feeling the familiar, suffocating weight of my childhood settling over my shoulders. My parents were rewriting my history, turning me into a monster in the eyes of the man I loved. I backed out of the office, leaving the paper exactly where I found it. I closed the door, my hands trembling so hard I could barely turn the knob. The seed of doubt had been planted in Julian's mind, and I had no idea if it had already begun to grow. The sabotage moved from the shadows into the glaring light of day on a Monday morning. I was sitting in my office at the resort, finalizing the catering menu for a corporate retreat. The air conditioning hummed a steady rhythm against the tropical heat, pressing on the glass windows. I needed to double-check the guest list for my own wedding to confirm the dietary restrictions for a few extended relatives. My mother had insisted on managing that specific spreadsheet on our family cloud drive months ago, back when she was still pretending to be a supportive parent. I clicked the shared link saved in my browser. A gray screen popped up. Access denied. Please contact the administrator for permission. I frowned and refreshed the page. The same error message stared back at me. I opened my phone to text my mother, assuming it was a technical glitch. That was when I saw the notification sitting in my Messages app. Sylvia Lopez removed you from the family group chat. I stared at the tiny gray text until the letters blurred. I checked the shared photo albums next. Gone. The folder containing our holiday itineraries. Gone. With a few clicks of a mouse, my parents had digitally scrubbed me from their existence. A cold wave of nausea washed over me. It was a visceral reaction to a very old wound. This was not the first time my family had erased me to prove a point. I was 16 years old when I won a scholarship to attend a marine biology summer camp on the Big Island. I spent 6 weeks studying coral reefs, feeling proud and independent for the first time in my life. When I returned home, dragging my canvas duffel bag through the front door, my parents did not greet me. I walked down the hall to my bedroom and froze. My bed was gone. My posters were stripped from the walls. The room smelled of fresh lavender paint. Custom white shelving lined the perimeter, displaying rows of Vanessa's designer shoes and handbags. My mother walked up behind me and casually mentioned that Vanessa needed a walk-in closet for her pageant gowns. She pointed down the hall and told me I could sleep in the guest room. The message was clear then, and it was clear now. I was merely a temporary resident in their lives, easily displaced, easily erased. The digital lockout was only the opening maneuver. The real strike happened the following evening. Julian and I were in the kitchen preparing dinner. He was chopping vegetables while I poured a glass of Pinot Noir. His phone buzzed on the marble island. He glanced at the screen and his knife stopped moving. He picked up the device and read the message twice. His jaw tightened. He looked up at me with an unreadable expression. "Your father just texted me," he said. "He wants to meet for dinner tonight at that upscale steakhouse in Lahaina. Just the two of us. He claims he wants to discuss a surprise wedding present." My grip tightened around the stem of my wine glass. My heart kicked into a frantic sprint. "It is a trap," I warned him. "They do not have a surprise gift, Julian. They want to get you alone so they can poison you against me. Please do not go." Julian set his phone down. He wiped his hands on a towel and walked over to me. He framed my face with his hands, his touch warm and grounding. "Let me hear what they have to say." Fiancé murmured, "I am a wealth manager, Alda. I deal with manipulative people negotiating hostile takeovers every single day. Your parents cannot intimidate me. I will be home by 10 o'clock. He changed into a crisp, button-down shirt, grabbed his keys, and drove away. I spent the next 3 hours pacing the hardwood floors of our living room. I listened to the waves crashing against the shoreline outside, feeling a rising sense of dread. I knew how my parents operated in private settings. They were masters of the subtle smear. They knew how to weave a fabricated story with just enough threads of truth to make it sound plausible. They would play the victims. They would look Julian in the eye and warn him about my supposed instability. When the front door finally clicked open, it was past 10:30. I stood up from the sofa, my pulse hammering in my throat. Julian walked into the foyer. His tie was loosened. His suit jacket was draped over his forearm. He did not smile. He did not cross the room to kiss me. The warm, grounding energy he possessed just a few hours ago had vanished, replaced by a rigid, chilling distance. He walked straight to the kitchen island, bypassed the wine, and poured himself a neat glass of bourbon. "How did it go?" I asked, my voice trembling. Julian stared out the dark window toward the ocean. He took a slow sip of the amber liquid. "It was informative," he replied. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "Just informative, nothing more." He refused to elaborate. He claimed he was exhausted and went straight to bed, turning his back to me. The next morning, the chasm between us widened into a canyon. Julian woke up before dawn. I found him sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at his phone. When I walked into the room, he immediately locked the screen and shoved the device into his pocket. He told me he had to go into the office early. He wore his sharpest charcoal suit, a tailored armor he usually reserved for aggressive board meetings. For the next 2 days, my fiancé became a ghost in his own house. The sabotage was working. I watched him slip into the garage to take phone calls, pacing the concrete floor with his phone pressed tight to his ear. I stood near the laundry room door, straining to hear the muffled tones. "We need to move fast on this," he whispered into the receiver. "Secure the documents before they realize what is happening." "Yes, I will sign the retainer today." Retainer. The word struck me like a physical blow. You pay a retainer to a lawyer. My trauma response hijacked my logic. My chest seized, and I struggled to pull air into my lungs. The narrative wrote itself in my panicked mind. My parents had shown him something at that steakhouse. They presented him with a lie so convincing, so damaging that Julian, the man of facts and risk assessment, had calculated that marrying me was a liability. He was not hiring a wedding vendor. He was consulting an attorney to dismantle our shared assets, to break the lease on our venue, to figure out how to legally untangle himself from the sociopath my parents claimed I was. I spiraled into a dark, suffocating hole. Every time I entered a room, Julian would close his laptop. He stopped asking about the floral arrangements. He stopped talking about our honeymoon in Greece. He treated me with a polite, sterile courtesy you would offer a stranger in an elevator. The man who had promised to stand by me was building a wall brick by brick. I was too paralyzed by my fear of abandonment to confront him. I believed I had already lost. Friday evening arrived carrying the weight of a funeral. The sunset painted the Maui sky in brilliant streaks of orange and purple, but the house felt like a tomb. I was sitting on the edge of the sofa, staring blankly at a wedding magazine. The bedroom door opened. Julian walked out carrying a leather duffel bag slung over his shoulder. The magazine slipped from my fingers and hit the rug. I stood up, my legs shaking. Julian stopped near the entryway. He would not meet my eyes. He looked at a spot on the wall just above my head. "Elda," he began, his tone smooth and detached. "I need a few days of space." The air rushed out of the room. Space, the universal precursor to an ending. "Why?" I whispered, my vision blurring with tears. "Where are you going?" "There is a complex situation I have to handle," he said, shifting the strap of his bag. "I need to process some things off-site. I have a lot of noise in my head right now, and I cannot think clearly here. Do not call me this weekend. I will reach out when I am ready." He did not offer a hug. He did not say he loved me. He opened the front door, stepped out into the humid evening air, and pulled the door shut behind him. The lock clicked into place, echoing through the silent house. I sank to the floor, pressing my palms against my eyes. The battle was over. My toxic family had infiltrated my safe haven, poisoned the man I loved, and successfully ruined my happiness. I sat in the dark alone, waiting for the final blow to land. The house felt like a vacuum after Julian walked out the front door. I did not move from the entryway for a long time. I just stared at the brass deadbolt. I spent Friday night curled on the living room rug, wrapping a knit throw blanket around my shoulders. The silence pressed against my eardrums. It was a heavy, predatory silence. It was the exact same silence that used to fill my childhood home. Whenever I asked a question my parents did not want to answer, I stared at the ceiling fans rotating in the dark. My mind searched frantically for clues. Why would Julian leave? What did my parents say to him at that upscale steakhouse? What lie could be so powerful that it made a rational, analytical wealth manager pack a duffel bag and walk away from our life together? My brain dug deep into the archives of my past, searching for any weapon they could have used against me. The memory hit me with the force of a physical blow. It was exactly 12 years ago. I was 20 years old, grinding through my junior year of college. My parents had point-blank refused to co-sign my student loans, claiming they needed their credit clear for a real estate investment. I was working a morning shift at a local coffee shop and an evening shift, bussing tables at a loud tourist trap, seafood restaurant just to pay my tuition. I smelled like roasted espresso beans and fried fish for 3 years straight. I counted every single tip dollar to buy textbooks. Vanessa was 19 at the time. She was supposed to be starting her sophomore year at a private university in Southern California. Instead, she came home to Maui in the middle of October without warning. My mother claimed Vanessa had contracted a severe case of mononucleosis. They kept her locked in the guest bedroom for weeks with the blinds drawn tight. When I did see her shuffling to the kitchen for a glass of water late at night, she looked like a ghost. Her skin was shallow and drained of its usual golden tan. Her eyes were sunken and shadowed. She wore oversized gray sweatpants and bulky hooded sweatshirts despite the sweltering tropical heat outside. She refused to look me in the eye. She flinched if I asked how she was feeling. A month later, Richard and Sylvia packed Vanessa into the family SUV at 4 a.m. They told our extended relatives she was embarking on a special semester abroad in a remote part of Eastern Europe to study art history. They shipped her off before the sun even cleared the horizon. I stood in the driveway in my stained restaurant uniform, holding my car keys, watching the red taillights fade into the dark street. I knew deep down that something was horribly wrong. You do not study art history in the middle of a fall semester while looking like you are hiding from the world. But I was too exhausted, balancing 2 jobs and a full course load to investigate her sudden departure. I accepted their flimsy lie because surviving my own daily life required all my energy. Now sitting on the floor of my empty house, that memory tasted like ash in my mouth. What was Vanessa hiding 12 years ago? How did her mysterious illness connect to the anonymous threat Julian received on his professional network? How did it connect to the rural medical clinic my father warned me never to mention when my insurance was denied? Saturday morning arrived with harsh, bright sunlight streaming through the wooden blinds. I had to go to work. The luxury resort industry did not care that my personal life was reduced to rubble. I had a 300-person destination wedding to execute on the Grand Lawn. I dragged myself off the rug. I stepped into a cold shower, letting the freezing water shock my nervous system into functioning. I dried my hair, painted on a flawless face of makeup to hide the dark circles, and slipped into my tailored navy uniform dress. I built my armor piece by piece. Walking through the lobby of the resort felt like navigating an alien planet. Happy couples held hands near the concierge desk. Valet whistled cheerful tunes while parking convertible rental cars. I pasted a professional bright smile on my face and marched into the grand ballroom. For the next 6 hours, I functioned like a highly calibrated machine. I directed the catering staff. I adjusted the lighting rigs. I supervised the precise placement of 1,000 imported white orchids on the dining tables. At one point, the bride had a tearful meltdown in the bridal suite because her bridesmaids wore the wrong shade of pink lipstick. I handed her a crystal glass of champagne and spoke in a soothing, measured tone. I fixed her minor crisis while my own chest felt hollowed out by an ice pick. I kept checking my phone hidden inside my leather clipboard. No missed calls from Julian, no text messages. The silence from him was a persistent, throbbing ache. I imagined him sitting in a sterile law office across town, signing documents to break our venue contract. I pictured him drafting a cold, formal email to our wedding guests, announcing the cancellation of our future. I did not know how wrong I was. While I was arranging orchids and swallowing my panic, Julian was not consulting a breakup lawyer. He was sitting in a windowless room in downtown Honolulu. He was drinking stale coffee across a metal desk from a high-end corporate investigator. The investigator was not hacking into sealed medical files. He was systematically following a financial trail. He was tracking a specific large cash withdrawal Richard Lopez made 12 years ago. Julian was spending his weekend tracing the exact coordinates of my parents' deceit. He was not abandoning me. He was arming himself for battle. I was oblivious to his loyalty. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the ballroom was flawless and ready for guests. I retreated to my private office located just behind the noisy banquet kitchen. I locked the door, kicked off my heels, and rubbed my aching temples. The exhaustion was pulling me under like a rip current. I reached for my phone, preparing to turn it off, and surrendered to the despair. The screen illuminated in my hand. A new text message appeared on the lock screen. It was not from Julian. It was from my mother. I stared at the name, Sylvia Lopez. My thumb hovered over the notification. I opened the message. We warned him about who you really are. You brought this on yourself. I read the 2 sentences. I read them again. The words were not an inquiry about my well-being. They were not a mother checking on her daughter. They were a victory lap. Sylvia was gloating. She knew Julian had left the house. She knew my relationship was fracturing. And she wanted to make sure I knew she was the architect of my misery. She wanted me to feel the full, crushing weight of her punishment for refusing to hand over $40,000 to bail out her golden child. Something broke inside me in that small, quiet office, but it was not my spirit. It was the invisible psychological leash my family had kept around my neck for 32 years. The panic receded. The heavy, suffocating despair evaporated into thin air. The tears that had been threatening to fall all day instantly dried up, leaving my eyes clear and focused. I stared at the bright screen of my phone and felt a profound chilling shift in my blood. My parents did not just have a misunderstanding with Julian. They did not just exaggerate a story over steaks and wine. They executed a calculated, ruthless hit job on my character. They looked at the beautiful, stable life I had built with a good man and they decided to burn it to the ground simply because I set a financial boundary. My own mother was celebrating my heartbreak through a text message. I locked my phone and set it face down on the wooden desk. The deep-seated fear of abandonment that had dictated my entire existence vanished. You cannot be abandoned by people who never truly claimed you in the first place. I took a slow, deep breath. The air filling my lungs felt crisp and sharp. I slipped my heels back on and stood up. I was done crying over their cruelty. I was done shrinking to make them comfortable. If my parents wanted a war, they were going to get one. I walked out of my office with a cold, quiet resolve, ready to face whatever came next. While I stood in my office staring at my phone, I believed I was entirely alone in my fight. I did not know that 50 miles away across the island channel, Julian was already dismantling their lies piece by piece. I only learned the true sequence of events long after the dust settled. Julian was not hiding from me to reconsider our relationship. He was sitting in a high-security conference room in downtown Honolulu, gathering the ammunition needed to destroy my parents' carefully constructed facade. He sat across a polished mahogany table from a private investigator named David. David was a former forensic accountant who specialized in uncovering the buried secrets of wealthy families. David did not breach secure government servers or hack into sealed family court records. He used a much simpler and far more devastating method. He followed the money. David laid a series of printed bank statements across the table. He pointed to a specific highlighted row of numbers. 12 years ago, Richard Lopez authorized a substantial wire transfer from a secondary investment account. He converted those funds into untraceable cash. David tracked the corresponding dates and local business registries to find where that cash vanished. The money trail led to a private physician operating a discreet rural medical clinic situated on the remote outskirts of upcountry Maui. The clinic was a modest building surrounded by dense sugar fields, far from the prying eyes of high society. It specialized in providing quiet medical care for affluent families desperate to avoid public scrutiny. The doctors demanded cash up front to bypass health insurance claims, leaving zero digital footprint on official medical databases. David then pulled a photocopied document from a thick manila envelope. It was a private adoption surrender agreement obtained through a disgruntled former clinic administrator. The name printed at the top of the form was Ulda Lopez. Julian stared at the ink. He did not need a handwriting expert to spot the deception. He knew the distinct sharp slant of my signature from the countless grocery lists and love notes I left on our kitchen counter. The signature on the legal document was a clumsy, rounded imitation. It was a blatant forgery. Julian sat in the quiet boardroom and assembled the puzzle. He remembered the story I told him about Vanessa coming home 12 years ago. He thought about the sudden mysterious illness and the baggy sweatshirts. He recalled the rushed semester abroad to Eastern Europe. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Vanessa was the one who hid in the guest bedroom. Vanessa was the one who carried a child. My parents orchestrated a secret closed adoption to protect the reputation of their favorite daughter. They utilized my clean identity to shield Vanessa from a crippling social scandal. They stole my name and attached it to a permanent medical record without my consent. Julian felt a cold, calculated anger settle deep in his chest. He thanked David, gathered the documents, and slipped the manila folder into his leather briefcase. He boarded a short inter-island flight back to Maui. He did not call me yet. He needed to set the stage. He drove to our house and sent a brief text message to my father, requesting an urgent private meeting. Richard and Sylvia arrived at our front door within the hour. They drove their pristine luxury sedan up the driveway, expecting to claim their ultimate victory. Julian let them inside. He offered them sparkling water. He directed them to the living room and took a seat in the leather armchair opposite the sofa. He kept the thick manila folder tucked safely out of sight inside his briefcase, resting on the floor. My parents sat close together on the sofa. Sylvia wore a designer silk blouse and her favorite pearls. Richard wore a crisp golf polo. They arranged their features into masks of solemn parental concern. They looked like people preparing to deliver tragic news, but their eyes darted around the room, taking in the expensive artwork and modern furniture. They were busy calculating the wealth they were trying to preserve their access to. Richard cleared his throat. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He played the role of the burdened, reluctant patriarch to perfection. He reached into his breast pocket and withdrew a folded piece of paper. He placed it on the glass coffee table and pushed it slowly toward Julian. "It is incredibly difficult for us to show you this," Richard began, his voice thick with rehearsed sorrow. "But we cannot let you walk into a marriage blind. We have a moral obligation to protect you." Julian looked down at the paper. It was a faded clinic invoice from 12 years ago. It bore the logo of the Rural Medical Center and listed my name as the primary patient. It outlined charges for a prolonged inpatient stay and postnatal care. Sylvia reached over and placed her hand on top of Richard's. She let out a soft, practiced sigh, dabbing the corner of her dry eye with a tissue. "Alda has always been troubled, Julian. She was reckless. She got pregnant at 20 years old and hid it from everyone. When the truth finally came out, she refused to take responsibility. We had to clean up her mess. We handled the quiet arrangements because she walked away from her own flesh and blood without shedding a single tear." Julian did not move. He kept his expression entirely neutral. He let the silence stretch, forcing them to fill the quiet room with more lies. "She lacks a fundamental maternal instinct," Sylvia continued, her tone dripping with fake sympathy. "Vanessa was devastated by the whole ordeal. Vanessa cried for weeks over the mistake her sister made. We all suffered. Alda is cold. She is calculating. We love our daughter, but she is deeply unwell. We fear she lacks the capacity for genuine empathy. We are telling you this because we see how hard you work. We see the beautiful life you are building. If you marry her, she will eventually drain your resources and abandon you the exact same way she abandoned that innocent child." Julian listened to their performance. He analyzed their subtle micro-expressions. He noted Richard adjusting his watch, a nervous tell he displayed whenever he lied about financial matters. He recognized them for exactly what they were. They were predators wearing the masks of concerned parents. He realized the sheer audacity of their plan. They were willing to brand their own daughter a sociopath. They were willing to destroy my future and my reputation. They orchestrated this entire elaborate deception for one singular reason. They wanted to punish me for refusing to hand over $40,000 to bail out Vanessa. Julian leaned back in his chair. He looked at the forged medical bill resting on the glass. He looked at the two people who raised me. He did not raise his voice. He did not call them liars. He knew that confronting them now without my presence would only allow them room to pivot and manipulate the narrative further. He wanted me to witness their downfall. He wanted me to see the exact moment their toxic reign over my life came to a permanent end. Julian reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He bypassed his text messages and opened his contacts. He dialed my number and pressed the phone to his ear. Sylvia and Richard exchanged a swift, confused glance. Their confident posture faltered. They expected Julian to break down. They expected him to thank them for their honesty and assure them the wedding was officially canceled. They did not expect him to make a phone call. I was still standing in my resort office when my phone began to vibrate on the desk. The caller ID flashed Julian's name. My heart leaped into my throat. I picked up the device and answered on the second ring. "Alda." His voice was steady and remarkably calm. It held no anger. It held no distance. It sounded like the man I fell in love with. "Yes," I breathed, gripping the edge of the desk. "Are you finished with your shift?" he asked. "I just finished," I replied, my pulse racing. "Good," Julian said. "I need you to come home right now. Your parents are sitting in our living room and we have something very important to discuss." He hung up the phone before I could ask any questions. I stared at the dark screen. The dial tone echoed in my ear. The final pieces were moving into place, and I had no idea I was about to walk into the ultimate confrontation. The drive from the resort to our neighborhood usually took 20 minutes. That evening, it felt like a lifetime. My hands gripped the leather steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The tropical breeze whipping through the open windows did nothing to cool the flush radiating across my chest. Julian had sounded steady on the phone, but the mere presence of my parents in our home signaled an unprecedented breach of my sanctuary. I pulled into the driveway and parked behind their pristine silver sedan. I turned off the engine, taking a single, steadying breath. I walked to the front door, turned my key in the lock, and stepped inside. The tension in the living room was thick enough to suffocate. My parents sat close together on our imported leather sofa. Sylvia had her hands folded neatly in her lap, displaying her diamond rings. Richard leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. They looked like an elite united front. Julian sat opposite them in his armchair. He did not look stressed. He looked remarkably composed, like a predator, patiently observing prey caught in a trap. A single sheet of paper rested on the glass coffee table between them. I stepped into the room, dropping my keys onto the entryway console. The sharp metallic clink made Sylvia flinch. I walked to Julian's side, but I did not sit down. I stood tall, refusing to shrink under their collective gaze. "What is going on?" I asked, keeping my voice cold and measured. Sylvia offered a theatrical sigh. She looked at Julian with an expression of profound pity, then turned her gaze to me. "We had to tell him the truth, Alda. We could not let this innocent man marry you without knowing what you did. We showed him the medical bill. We told him about the child you abandoned." I stared at her. The sheer audacity of the lie temporarily paralyzed my vocal cords. They had actually done it. They brought their fabricated weapon directly to my fiancé. I looked down at the faded invoice resting on the glass. I saw my name printed across the top row. The letters looked jagged and hostile. Richard shifted on the leather cushions. He gripped his knees, his knuckles straining. He looked Julian square in the eye, playing the role of the exhausted, burdened patriarch. "She is a liar, always has been." The silence that followed was heavy and dangerous. I waited for Julian to demand an explanation. I braced myself to defend my character, to explain the missing medical records to somehow prove a negative. I was preparing for the hardest fight of my life. Julian did not blink. He sat back in his armchair, steepling his fingers together. "I know." My parents exchanged a swift, glittering look. A spark of triumph ignited in my mother's eyes. They thought they had won. They thought the seed of doubt had fully blossomed, and Julian was siding with them. Sylvia even offered a small, tragic nod of solidarity. Then Julian finished his sentence. "I know that you made it up, and I have the private investigator's full report right here." He reached down and lifted a thick manila folder from his leather briefcase. He dropped it onto the glass coffee table right next to their forged invoice. The heavy paper slapped against the hard surface with a sharp crack. The color drained from my father's face in an instant. The smug triumph vanished from my mother's eyes, replaced by raw, unfiltered panic. Richard's mouth opened, but no sound emerged. He stared at the manila folder as if it were an explosive device. Julian leaned forward, unfastening the metal clasp of the folder. He extracted a stack of documents. He did not raise his voice. His calm surgical precision made the moment infinitely more terrifying for them. "Let us review the executive summary." Julian said, his tone carrying the chill of a boardroom execution. "The child is very real, but it does not belong to Alda. The child belongs to Vanessa." Sylvia let out a strangled gasp. She pressed a trembling hand over her mouth. 12 years ago, Julian continued tracing a line of text with his index finger. Richard Lopez authorized a withdrawal of $65,000 from a hidden investment portfolio. That cash was delivered to a private rural medical clinic account. We have the financial routing details. We also have the testimony of a former clinic administrator. You orchestrated a closed private adoption to protect Vanessa's golden reputation after a reckless teenage pregnancy. But you needed an airtight shield. So you brought Alda's identification cards. You paid the staff to look the other way. You forged your eldest daughter's signature on the surrender documents, permanently linking her name to the medical record. You stole her identity to save your favorite child. I stood frozen beside Julian's chair. The puzzle pieces collided in my mind with staggering force. The memory of Vanessa wearing baggy sweatshirts in the sweltering heat. The sudden, mysterious illness that kept her hidden in the guest room. The abrupt, early, morning departure for a fake semester abroad in Eastern Europe. The life insurance policy I was denied a decade ago due to a rural clinic admission. My parents had sacrificed my future, my name, and my medical history to preserve the pristine country club image of my younger sister. Richard stammered, his hands shaking violently against his knees. You cannot prove any of this. This is slander. This is illegal hacking. I did not hack anything, Julian replied, his voice dropping an octave. Forensic accountants follow the money, Richard, and your money trail is a gaping, bleeding wound. Julian picked up a secondary stack of papers from the folder. The atmosphere in the room shifted from exposure to utter devastation. Julian was not finished. He was about to reveal the ultimate hidden truth. Which brings us to last Tuesday, Julian said, locking eyes with my father. The urgent phone call, the desperate demand for $40,000 by Friday. You claimed Vanessa was drowning in credit card debt and facing lawsuits. Sylvia swallowed hard. Her pristine posture crumpled. She looked small and incredibly fragile. That was another lie. Julian stated Vanessa is not in debt. You are. The $40,000 was not to bail out your golden child. It was to pay your extortionist. My heart stalled in my chest. Extortionist! Julian turned the paperwork around so Richard and Sylvia could see the highlighted banking ledgers. The adoptive family did not remain in the dark, Julian explained. Years ago, they submitted a standard DNA test for the child's medical background. Through genetic registries, they matched with a distant cousin of yours. It did not take them long to figure out the true identity of the biological mother. They realized the wealthy, prominent Lopez family had orchestrated a fraudulent adoption using a stolen identity. That is a severe felony. And the adoptive parents knew exactly how much that secret was worth. I stared at my parents, the pristine country club facade shattered before my eyes. They were not elite, untouchable socialites. They were hostages. For the past 10 years, Julian said, his voice echoing in the quiet room, you have been paying them hush money, scheduled untraceable transfers. You depleted your savings. You drained the college funds. You reorgaged the house. The extortion bled you dry. Last week, the blackmailers demanded a lump sum of $40,000 to keep quiet. You did not have the liquidity. So, you tried to steal Alda's wedding fund. And when she said no, you decided to ruin her life as punishment. The silence in the living room was profound. The truth lay exposed on the glass table, ugly and undeniable. Sylvia began to weep, quiet, pathetic tears, ruining her expensive makeup. Richard stared at the floor, his shoulders slumped forward, stripped of all his arrogant authority. They had tried to paint me as a sociopath to hide their own monstrous crimes. Get out of my house, Julian said. He did not yell. The command was cold and absolute. He stood up, towering over the two people who had spent my entire life making me feel small. Julian, please, Sylvia whispered, her voice cracking. We had no choice. We were trying to protect the family. You do not know the meaning of the word family, Julian replied. Take your forged invoice and leave. If you ever contact Alda again, I will hand this entire folder over to the state authorities and the local press. You will face identity theft charges and public ruin. Richard stood up on shaking legs. He did not look at me. He could not meet my eyes. He reached down to grab his wife by the arm, pulling her up from the sofa. They shuffled toward the entryway, looking like hollowed-out shells of the proud, affluent people who had arrived an hour earlier. I watched the front door close behind them, the lock engaged with a solid, satisfying click. Julian turned to me, his expression softening. He pulled me into his arms, holding me tight against his chest. The war was supposed to be over. The truth was out, and the enemy was banished. But as I stood in the quiet hallway listening to their car engine start in the driveway, a new chilling realization crept into my mind. My parents were broke, desperate, and terrified. We had taken away their final financial lifeline and cornered them with a threat of prison. Desperate people do not simply surrender and fade into the shadows. They lash out. The truth was out, but the fallout was only just beginning. The heavy oak door had just clicked shut. I stood in the foyer, leaning my weight against Julian's shoulder. The air in our house still held the bitter residue of their lies. Waited to hear the sound of their car engine turning over. I waited for the tires to crunch against the gravel as they retreated to their affluent neighborhood. Instead, I heard a sharp, piercing scream. It shattered the quiet Hawaiian night. My pulse spiked. I pulled away from Julian and rushed to the front window, sweeping back the linen curtain. The motion sensor floodlights illuminated the driveway in a stark white glare. My mother was not sitting in the passenger seat of their silver sedan. She was sprawled across the immaculate concrete. Sylvia clutched her chest with both hands, her knees drawn upward in a posture of agony. Her designer purse lay tossed aside, spilling expensive lipstick and mints across the pavement. Richard hovered over her, waving his arms and shouting toward our dark windows. He looked frantic. The pristine country club patriarch had vanished, replaced by a panicked man screaming for a doctor. I felt a sudden surge of genuine terror. My deep childhood conditioning kicked into overdrive. I reached for the brass dagger handle, ready to sprint outside and tend to the woman who gave birth to me. Julian gently placed his hand over mine, stopping the motion. He looked through the glass, his expression analytical and cold. "Do not rush out there," he warned softly. "Watch her breathing. Watch her hands." I focused my gaze through the window. Sylvia was writhing on the concrete. She arched her back and let out theatrical, breathless gasps that echoed loudly in the humid air. But her skin retained its normal color. Her hands were not trembling with the genuine distress of a cardiac event. They were carefully positioned on her blouse, protecting her manicured nails from scraping against the rough driveway. I watched her shift her weight to avoid resting on her bare elbow. I realized Julian was right. This was a performance. It was weaponized vulnerability. When my parents lost control of a narrative, they manufactured a medical crisis to regain the upper hand and force compliance. The memory surfaced with bitter clarity. I was 18 years old, standing on a high school auditorium stage holding a regional academic trophy. It was a rare moment of personal victory, recognizing months of grueling study. But halfway through the ceremony, Sylvia suddenly claimed she was experiencing a severe, debilitating migraine. She gasped loudly and leaned heavily on my father, disrupting the entire row of seated parents. We had to leave the building before my name was even called for the final photograph. My achievement was eclipsed by her sudden medical emergency. As soon as we reached the safety of our air-conditioned house, her migraine miraculously vanished. She spent the rest of the evening drinking chilled wine and complaining about the auditorium seating. She used illness as a leash to yank attention back to herself. Now, 12 years later, she was playing the exact same card on my driveway. She wanted us to abandon our boundaries, rush to her side, and drown the truth in a sea of manufactured guilt. Julian did not open the front door. He pulled his phone from his pocket and dialed emergency services. He spoke to the dispatcher in a flat, measured tone. He reported an older woman experiencing distress in a residential driveway. He provided our address and disconnected the wall. We stood in the foyer watching the spectacle unfold under the floodlights. Richard continued to yell toward the house, demanding we come outside and take responsibility for pushing her to the brink. We remained silent observers. 10 minutes later, the wail of a siren cut through the tropical breeze. Red and blue lights flashed across the palm trees lining our street. A bright yellow ambulance pulled into the driveway, blocking their sedan from the street. 2 paramedics jumped out carrying heavy trauma bags. They knelt beside Sylvia, asking her sharp, focused questions. I finally stepped out onto the front porch with Julian right beside me. The thick night air wrapped around us. Sylvia saw me emerge, and her gasps immediately intensified. She reached a trembling hand toward one of the medics, pointing a shaking finger at Julian and me. "They did this to me," she whimpered, her voice fragile and thin. "My own daughter is trying to kill me with her cruelty. They are abusing us." The paramedics ignored her dramatic accusations. They operated with practiced clinical efficiency. They strapped a blood pressure cuff to her arm and clipped a pulse oximeter to her finger. One medic pressed a stethoscope to her chest, listening intently to her heart rate. Richard paced nervously, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Please help her," Richard pleaded, wiping sweat from his forehead. "She has a delicate heart. The stress of this family dispute is too much for her to bear." The senior paramedic checked the glowing digital monitor. He unclipped the sensor from her finger and peeled the Velcro blood pressure cuff from her arm. He did not look panicked. He looked tired. "Your vitals are perfectly normal, ma'am," he stated, his voice carrying a hint of professional irritation. "Your heart rate is slightly elevated, but your oxygen levels are optimal and your rhythm is steady. You are not having a cardiac event. You are experiencing a basic anxiety response." Sylvia stopped gasping. She blinked up at the medic, her face flushing an angry, mottled red. "Are you calling me a liar?" she demanded, her fragile demeanor vanishing in an instant. Her voice was suddenly strong and sharp. "I am telling you what the diagnostic equipment says," the medic replied, standing up and hoisting his heavy bag onto his shoulder. "We can transport you to the local hospital for observation if you insist, but there is no medical emergency here. I suggest you drink some water and sit in a quiet place to calm your nerves." The paramedics turned around and walked back to their ambulance. The flashing emergency lights shut off, leaving the driveway bathed only in the stark glare of our security lamps. The diesel engine rumbled as the heavy vehicle backed out into the street and drove away. Sylvia remained sitting on the concrete, her theatrical performance dismantled by science and trained professionals. She looked pathetic. The lingering embers of my childhood fear finally burned out. The anger evaporated. A cold, profound clarity settled deep into my bones. I walked down the porch steps and stopped 5 feet away from where she sat. Richard moved to help her stand, brushing dust from her silk blouse. They looked at me, expecting a negotiation. They expected me to offer a compromise or a tearful apology to smooth over the awkwardness of the evening. They thought the old Alda, the one who managed their emotions and absorbed their toxicity, would step forward to fix the mess. I looked at the woman who spent my life diminishing my worth. I looked at the man who stood by and enabled every cruelty just to maintain his fake country club prestige. "You are not attending my wedding," I said. The words hung in the night air, crisp and heavy. Richard opened his mouth to argue, but I raised my hand, silencing him. "You are no longer on the guest list. You are no longer welcome on this property. You tried to frame me as a monster to cover your own felony. You tried to extract $40,000 from my future to pay for your past mistakes. You are not my family anymore. Do not ever contact me again." Sylvia stared at me. Her jaw trembled, but the fake tears were gone. She realized the psychological leash was truly broken. She had no leverage left to pull. She turned away, opening the passenger door of their sedan and sliding into the leather seat without looking back. Richard stood in the driveway for a long moment. He looked like a man who had gambled his entire estate and lost every single chip on the table. He walked around the car, got behind the wheel, and started the engine. I turned around and walked back up the stairs. Julian held the front door open for me. We stepped inside and locked the deadbolt together. I pulled my phone from my pocket. I opened my contact list. I found my mother's name and tapped block. I found my father's name and tapped block. I deleted their previous message threads, erasing their digital footprint from my daily life. I felt a physical weight lift from my shoulders. The silence in the house no longer felt predatory. It felt peaceful. It was the deep quiet of a sanctuary finally secured. But my parents were only one half of the toxic equation. The manila folder still sat on our glass coffee table, containing the explosive truth about the golden child. The secret of the hidden adoption was no longer buried in a rural medical clinic. The blackmailers knew the truth. Julian knew the truth. I knew the truth. And secrets of that magnitude cannot remain contained for long. My parents had fled into the night to lick their wounds, but they were returning to a life built entirely on a decaying lie. The social circle they valued above their own daughter was about to face a reckoning. Vanessa was sleeping soundly in her luxury apartment, entirely unaware that the fraudulent foundation of her perfect existence was already beginning to crumble. Secrets within the elite social circles of Maui do not stay buried for long. They spread like wildfire through manicured golf courses, exclusive dining rooms, and private charity galas. The private investigator's report sitting in Julian's briefcase was a loaded weapon. Julian never intended to publish the sensitive documents online or hand them over to a local gossip blog. He operated within the refined, sterile boundaries of corporate wealth management. He understood that affluent families protect their assets and their reputations above all else. Vanessa was engaged to a man named Preston. Preston was the sole heir to a lucrative commercial real estate empire. His family employed a small army of risk assessment attorneys to thoroughly vet any potential liabilities before a marriage license was ever signed. Julian simply arranged for a redacted summary of the financial extortion trail to cross the desk of Preston's lead attorney. It was a professional courtesy. A quiet morning passed between financial custodians. The attorneys did not care about a teenage pregnancy. Wealthy dynasties sweep biological scandals under luxury rugs every single day. What horrified the legal team was the criminal pathology surrounding the event. They reviewed the forged medical documents. They noted the stolen identity. They analyzed the ongoing active blackmail payments draining the Lopez family accounts for a decade. And most damning of all, they saw the recent calculated attempt to destroy my life just to fund the extortionist's sudden demands. Preston's family looked at Vanessa and saw a walking legal liability, a woman raised by people willing to commit felonies to preserve an image. Preston confronted my sister on a Tuesday afternoon. The exact details trickled back to me through the tight-knit network of resort event planners. Preston did not yell. He did not offer counseling or suggest a period of reflection. He handled the betrayal like a corporate merger gone sour. He demanded the immediate return of his 4-carat diamond engagement ring. He canceled their lavish country club reservation with a single swift phone call. He ordered his security staff to pack her belongings and escorted her out of their shared oceanfront penthouse before sunset. He looked at the woman he was supposed to marry and realized he did not know her at all. He saw the toxic rot hiding beneath her perfect golden tan and designer wardrobe. Vanessa was unceremoniously discarded. The elite social circles she wore ripped instantly closed their ranks. Wealthy friends stopped returning her text messages. Her regular lunch invitations were declined. The exclusive boutiques where she spent my parents' money suddenly treated her with cold, polite distance. The golden child became a social pariah in less than 48 hours. I experienced the true depth of her downfall on Wednesday night. A tropical depression was moving across the island, bringing heavy, relentless rain. Julian was upstairs in his study reviewing client portfolios. I was in the kitchen brewing a cup of chamomile tea. The sudden frantic pounding on the front door startled me. The heavy brass knocker slammed against the wood in a chaotic, desperate rhythm. I set my mug on the granite counter and walked into the foyer. I checked the security camera monitor mounted on the wall. A solitary figure stood on our porch, soaked by the driving rain. I turned the deadbolt and pulled the door open. Vanessa stood shivering under the harsh amber porch light. The pristine social light was gone. Her expensive silk blouse clung to her skin, drenched and wrinkled. Her perfect salon blowout was ruined, plastered against her cheeks in wet, dark streaks. Mascara ran down her face, leaving hollow gray shadows under her eyes. She looked exactly like the pale, terrified 19-year-old girl who hid in our guest bedroom 12 years ago. The illusion of her superiority had washed away in the storm. "Alda," she gasped, her voice ragged and breathless. "Please let me in. You have to help me." I stood firm, blocking the doorway. The cold wind whipped across the porch, carrying the scent of salt and bruised palm ferns. "What are you doing here, Vanessa?" She wrapped her arms around her torso, shivering uncontrollably. "Preston left me. Everyone knows. The whole country club knows about the clinic. They know about the blackmail. His mother called me a criminal. My friends are treating me like a disease. I cannot stay on this island. Alda, the shame is going to kill me. I need to leave tonight." I watched her unravel. For the first time in my life, I did not feel the urge to accommodate her pain. I did not step aside to offer her a warm towel or a soothing word. "Where are our parents?" I asked, keeping my tone flat and neutral. She let out a bitter, sobbing laugh. "They are locking the doors and refusing to answer the phone. They are terrified of the lawyers. They told me I am on my own. They threw me to the wolves." "Alda, it was their idea to use your name at the clinic. It was their idea to forge the signature. I was just a kid. I was scared. You have to believe me." She reached out and grabbed my wrist. Her fingers were ice cold. Her grip was desperate and tight. "I need $10,000, she pleaded. "Just $10,000. You have the wedding fund. Julian has money. I can buy a plane ticket to Los Angeles tonight. I can change my name and start over. You are my sister. You are the only blood I have left who can save me." I looked down at her hand gripping my wrist. I saw the familiar entitlement hiding just beneath the panic. She was not apologizing for stealing my identity. She was not expressing remorse for sitting in a cafe last week and telling Julian I was a sociopath. She was playing the victim to avoid the consequences of a decade of lies. She still viewed me as an automated teller machine, a convenient resource to be drained whenever her life became uncomfortable. She was a toxic byproduct of our parents, raising her to believe she was immune to accountability. I peeled her cold fingers off my arm. I stepped back, creating a clear physical boundary between us. "I am not your escape plan, Vanessa." I spoke the words slowly, ensuring she heard every single syllable over the sound of the heavy rain. "You stood by while they forged my name. You smiled while they drained my college fund to buy your luxury cars. You happily watched them try to destroy my engagement so you could keep your ugly secret buried. You built your perfect life on my bones. And now that your foundation is collapsing, you want me to buy you a ticket out of the rubble?" "Alda, please," she shrieked, taking a step forward. "You cannot do this to me. I will not give you a single dime," I replied. "You are an adult. It is time you face the reality you helped create." I pulled the heavy oak door closed. Vanessa threw her hands against the wood. The muffled sound of her fists pounding against the barrier echoed in the foyer. She screamed my name into the storm, a raw, jagged sound of pure entitlement denied. I turned the deadbolt, locking her outside in the dark. I walked back to the kitchen and picked up my tea. The golden child was finally dethroned. But a king and queen do not lose their favorite heir without seeking vengeance. The following morning, my parents proved they were ready to burn the rest of the world down just to punish me for closing that door. The morning after I locked my sister out in the rain, the digital assault began. I woke up at 6 o'clock to prepare for work. My phone was vibrating continuously against the wooden nightstand. 52 new notifications crowded the lock screen. I opened my social media application and felt my stomach drop. My mother had published a lengthy public statement on her profile. She tagged dozens of our extended relatives and prominent members of her elite country club. She did not mention the forged clinic documents. She did not mention her financial extortion. Instead, she spun a narrative of profound parental grief. She wrote about the heartbreak of raising an ungrateful child. She claimed I was engaging in shady activities and that she and my father had to step away for their own personal safety. She painted herself as a tragic martyr, suffering the abuse of a cruel daughter who turned her back on family obligations. The comment section was a chorus of toxic validation. Aunts and uncles who had not spoken to me in 5 years left paragraphs of unsolicited advice. They condemned my character. My Aunt Gloria, who always coveted my mother's country club status, left a scathing voicemail on my personal phone. She called me a disgrace to the family name. She said I was punishing my parents for my own failures. Sylvia was weaponizing her social network to isolate me. She wanted to exert public pressure because her private manipulation had failed. I deleted the application from my phone entirely. I refused to defend myself in a digital coliseum governed by a liar. I drove to the resort focusing on the rhythm of my breathing. I had a wedding rehearsal to coordinate on the South Lawn, and I needed to remain professional. I walked through the grand lobby holding my leather clipboard. The scent of fresh hibiscus and plumeria filled the air conditioning. A man in a cheap gray suit sat in the waiting area. He stood up as I passed the concierge desk. He held a thick manila envelope. He asked if I was Imelda Lopez. I nodded cautiously. He pressed the envelope against my clipboard, stating I had been served, and walked away without another word. I retreated to my private office and tore the paper seal. It was a formal legal summon. A civil lawsuit filed in the local district court. The plaintiff was Richard Lopez. The charge was defamation of character and intentional infliction of emotional distress. I scanned the dense legal jargon. My father was claiming my false accusations regarding his financial history had caused him severe medical anxiety and reputational harm. But the true purpose of the lawsuit was hidden on the final page. It was a settlement demand letter. Richard proposed a binding agreement. He would drop the lawsuit and guarantee his permanent absence from my upcoming wedding if I transferred $100,000 into his primary checking account by Friday afternoon. I stared at the demand letter. The sheer calculated evil of the document stole the breath from my lungs. This was not a legitimate legal grievance. It was a shakedown. The blackmailers had demanded $40,000 a few days ago. My parents were drowning in debt and facing exposure. So they hired a desperate attorney to draft a frivolous lawsuit, hoping the threat of a prolonged public court battle would terrify me into paying them hush money. They were trying to legally rob their own daughter to fund their crimes. I did not. When I arrived, Julian was sitting behind his mahogany desk. He took the legal documents from my hands and read them line by line. His face was a mask of cold, surgical precision. He did not hire a local family attorney to negotiate a settlement. He picked up his desk phone and dialed the managing partner of the most ruthless corporate litigation firm in Honolulu. These were the attorneys who handled hostile corporate takeovers and multi-million-dollar fraud cases. Julian kept them on retainer for his high net worth clients. Within 2 hours, a team of legal sharks was analyzing the complaint over secure video conference. They reviewed the thick manila folder containing the private investigator's report, the forged medical documents, and the financial wire transfers. The senior partner explained the strategy. You do not play defense against extortion. You annihilate the threat. Julian's legal team drafted a brutal countersuit. They charged Richard and Sylvia with extortion, fraud, and identity theft across state lines. They documented the forged signature at the rural medical clinic. They outlined the decade of blackmail payments. But the most critical maneuver was immediate protective action. Using the settlement demand letter as documented proof of financial extortion and targeted harassment, the attorneys filed a motion for an emergency temporary restraining order. That presented the evidence to a judge in chambers outlining the severe psychological and financial threat my parents posed just days before my wedding. The judge granted the injunction without hesitation. The order established a strict 500-foot physical boundary. Richard and Sylvia were legally forbidden from approaching me, my residence, my workplace, or my wedding venue. If they violated the perimeter, they would be subjected to immediate arrest. The final blow landed late Thursday afternoon. My father had hired a discount attorney operating out of a strip mall in Kahului to draft his bogus lawsuit. This attorney thought he was handling a simple family dispute over wedding finances. He expected a quick out-of-court court settlement and a fast IC's contingency fee. Instead, he received a courier package from Julian's elite Honolulu firm. The package contained the brutal countersuit, the emergency restraining order, and a summarized dossier of the felony identity theft and medical fraud his clients had committed. The local attorney took one look at the evidence and realized he was being used as a pawn in an active extortion scheme. In the American legal system, an attorney can face severe disciplinary action, including disbarment, for facilitating extortion or aiding an ongoing fraud. He panicked. He drafted a formal notice of withdrawal and filed it with the court before the clerk office closed for the day. He sent a brief chilling email to my father, terminating their attorney-client relationship effective immediately. He wanted nothing to do with the Lopez family. By sunset, my parents were isolated. They had no legal representation. They had no access to funds. They were staring down the barrel of a corporate countersuit that would expose their darkest secrets in a public courtroom, and they were legally barred from coming anywhere near me. The trap was sprung, and the steel jaws had snapped shut around them. Julian poured us 2 glasses of sparkling water in our kitchen. We stood by the marble island, reviewing the digital copy of the restraining order. The legal perimeter was secure. My parents were cornered and stripped of their weapons. But as I looked at the black text on the legal document, a cold sliver of unease slid down my spine. Tomorrow was Friday. Tomorrow evening was our rehearsal dinner at a beautiful beachfront restaurant. We had cornered 2 narcissists who were watching their pristine social standing evaporate into thin air. They had nothing left to lose, and people with nothing left to lose are the most dangerous predators of all. Friday evening arrived bathed in the luminous golden light of a Hawaiian sunset. The rehearsal dinner took place at an exclusive open-air restaurant overlooking the crashing waves in Valaya. Torchlight danced across the white linen tables, casting warm shadows against the tropical foliage. The air carried the scent of roasted seafood and salt water. I wore a simple ivory silk slip dress. Julian stood beside me in a tailored linen suit, looking handsome and remarkably relaxed. We had secured the legal perimeter. The restraining order was active. For the first time in weeks, the crushing weight of my family drama felt distant. I stood near the private mahogany bar talking with Julian's parents, Catherine and William Sterling. The Starings were the antithesis of my own parents. They possessed generational wealth, but they displayed it with quiet discretion rather than loud country club arrogance. Catherine served on the board of several philanthropic foundations dedicated to education and the arts. She had sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing and a posture that commanded instant respect. She read people with a terrifying accuracy. Yet she embraced me from the moment Julian first introduced us. She treated me with a warmth and genuine curiosity I never experienced in my own childhood home. She asked about my career. She valued my opinions. She embodied the sanctuary of a chosen family. The evening flowed beautifully. A string quartet played a soft melody in the corner of the patio. Waiters circulated with silver trays of champagne and appetizers. I was holding a glass of sparkling cider when a sudden chill ran down my arms. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I turned my gaze toward the main entrance of the restaurant. Walking past the bewildered young hostess were Richard and Sylvia Lopez. They wore their most expensive formal attire. Sylvia wore a beaded sapphire gown that caught the torchlight. Richard wore a custom-tailored tuxedo. They projected an aura of elite confidence, using their polished social entitlement to stride past the entry staff without an invitation. They were actively violating a court-ordered injunction. Their mere presence on the property was a criminal act. They risked immediate arrest just by breathing the same air as me. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic warning rhythm. I placed my drink on a passing tray and stepped forward, intending to intercept them. Julian saw them too. His jaw tightened. He immediately signaled to the private security team he hired for the weekend. 2 men in dark suits began moving discreetly through the crowded patio. But my parents did not walk toward me. They did not come to scream or cause a public scene. They executed a targeted flanking maneuver. They bypassed our bridal party entirely and walked directly toward Catherine and William Sterling. I quickened my pace, navigating through my friends and colleagues. My mind raced, trying to anticipate their strategy. By the time I reached the edge of the patio, Sylvia was already speaking to Julian's mother. Sylvia wore a mask of pristine tragedy. She held a flute of stolen champagne and leaned in close to Catherine, projecting an aura of shared maternal burden. "Catherine, it is so wonderful to finally meet you," Sylvia purred, her voice dripping with rehearsed sorrow. "I am Alda's mother. I know there has been some unfortunate miscommunication lately, but we simply could not miss the eve of our daughter's wedding." Catherine did not smile. She did not extend her hand in greeting. She stood perfectly still, holding a crystal glass of Pinot Noir. William stood beside his wife, his expression carved from stone. He recognized a threat the moment it approached his family. "We are sure Alda has told you some creative stories." Sylvia continued, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "She has always had a vivid imagination. She struggles with her mental health, and she tends to push people away when she feels overwhelmed. We are just here out of love. We know how difficult she can be, and we wanted to assure you that we are here to support your family through her inevitable episodes." I stopped a few feet away, my blood running cold. Sylvia was attempting a desperate psychological strike. She wanted to poison my new family. She was trying to plant a seed of doubt in Catherine's mind, hoping the Starings would view me as a damaged liability. She believed she could leverage her fake elite status to bond with Catherine and isolate me on the eve of my wedding. I stepped up beside Julian, ready to demand they leave the premises. Catherine held up a single manicured finger, silently asking me to wait. She did not need my protection. Catherine looked Sylvia up and down, her gaze swept over the beaded sapphire, the forced smile, and the desperate calculating eyes. Catherine took a slow, deliberate sip of her red wine. She swallowed and lowered the glass, her movements graceful and unhurried. "Sylvia, is it?" Catherine asked, her tone polite but laced with a chilling high society venom. "Yes," Sylvia replied, her smile faltering slightly under the icy scrutiny. Catherine tilted her head, studying my mother like an unpleasant insect. "I find it fascinating that you assume I share your profound lack of judgment. Julian keeps no secrets from us. He has shared everything. We have seen the financial records. We have seen the forged medical documents. We know exactly what kind of people you are." Sylvia gasped, taking a clumsy step back. Her champagne sloshed over the rim of her glass, staining her sapphire dress. Richard puffed out his chest, attempting to salvage their vanishing dignity. "Now listen here, Catherine," Richard said, his voice rising in panic. "You are being manipulated by a troubled young woman who lies to get her way." Catherine cut him off, her voice dropping to a terrifying, quiet register that commanded the space around them. "Do not speak to me. You are currently violating a strict restraining order. My son has private security standing right behind you. If you do not turn around and walk out that door in total silence, I will personally ensure the local police handcuff you in front of all these lovely guests." Catherine took one step closer to my mother, her eyes locked onto Sylvia's, stripping away every layer of the Lopez family facade. "We are thrilled to be the only parents Alda will ever need," Catherine stated. "Now leave." The two security guards materialized directly behind Richard and Sylvia, blocking their path into the restaurant. They did not grab them or cause a physical altercation. The sheer looming presence of the guards, combined with Catherine's devastating verbal execution, broke their resolve. My parents realized they had no audience and no allies. The toxic narrative they tried to spin unraveled in a matter of seconds. Sylvia turned pale, a sickly shade of gray. She gripped Richard's arm, her manicured fingers digging into his tuxedo jacket. They turned around and walked briskly toward the rear exit, flanked by the security team. They were not allowed to walk back through the beautiful main lobby. They were escorted out through the service doors, past the bustling kitchen staff and the grease-stained dumpsters. It was an unceremonious and deeply humiliating retreat. Catherine turned to me. Her icy demeanor melted away in an instant, replaced by genuine warmth. She placed a soft, reassuring hand on my cheek. Go enjoy your dinner, sweetheart, she murmured. Forget those ghosts ever existed. Julian kissed my forehead. The string quartet continued playing their soft melody. The guests remained largely unaware of the silent, brutal war that just occurred at the edge of the patio. The EI returned to the luxury bridal suite at the resort, feeling protected and cherished. My chosen family had formed a shield around me, easily deflecting the venom of my past. But as I lay in the dark, listening to the wind rattle the palm trees outside my balcony, a tight knot of dread formed in my stomach. My parents had just been humiliated by the very elite social class they worshipped. They had been tossed out of a restaurant like common vagrants. They were cornered, desperate, bankrupt, and stripped of their false dignity. The sun would rise in a few short hours, bringing the morning of my wedding, and I knew with terrifying certainty that Sylvia Lopez would never let me walk down the aisle without attempting one final devastating strike. The morning sunlight filtered through the sheer curtains of the bridal suite. The ocean breeze carried the faint scent of jasmine and salt water into the spacious room. My makeup artist hummed a quiet tune while she blended foundation across my cheekbones. A hairstylist stood behind me, pinning intricate curls into a sleek, elegant shiny. My bridesmaids were in the adjoining lounge, sipping mimosas and laughing softly. The atmosphere was designed to be a serene sanctuary of joy. I stared at my reflection in the gilded vanity mirror, trying to embrace the tranquility. I wanted to focus entirely on the man waiting for me at the end of the aisle. Yet, a tight knot of dread remained coiled in my stomach, a lingering shadow from the restaurant patio the night before. I knew my mother better than anyone. Sylvia never accepted defeat gracefully. When her ego sustained an injury, she retaliated with calculated precision. I remembered my high school graduation party. She spent weeks planning a lavish backyard catered event. But when my uncle gave a toast praising my academic scholarship, Sylvia suddenly knocked over a crystal vase and spent the rest of the afternoon sobbing in her bedroom, claiming the stress of hosting was destroying her nerves. If a celebration did not center around her, she transformed it into a tragedy. Today was the most important day of my life. She was legally banished from the premises, stripped of her country club dignity, and facing severe financial ruin. It was a volatile combination. A gentle knock interrupted my thoughts. One of my bridesmaids opened the door and peered inside, holding a small square package wrapped in plain brown paper. "The concierge just brought this up," she whispered, trying not to disturb the makeup artist. "He said a courier dropped it off at the main security gate, labeled urgent for the bride." A cold chill traced my spine. I asked the stylist for a brief pause. I took the small package and walked into the private master bathroom, shutting the heavy wooden door behind me. The white marble room was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. I set the box on the vanity. It lacked a return address. It lacked any decorative ribbon or wedding card. It felt ominously sterile. My fingers trembled slightly as I tore the brown paper away. Beneath the wrapping sat a plain white cardboard box. I lifted the lid. The first item inside was a photograph. It was an old Polaroid from my 7th birthday party. In the image, I was wearing a bright yellow dress, smiling up at my mother, who held a frosted cake. But the photograph was ruined. Someone had torn it jaggedly right down the middle, separating my face from hers. Beneath the severed photograph lay a cheap black plastic prepaid cellular phone. I stared at the device. The dark screen reflected the stark overhead lighting. A burner phone, the kind of untraceable device criminals use to negotiate ransoms. Before I could process the meaning, the phone erupted. The harsh electronic ringtone pierced the quiet marble room. The sound was shrill and demanding. It echoed off the tile walls, scraping against my frayed nerves. I stared at the flashing screen for 3 long rings. I knew who was calling. The intuition was bone deep. I picked up the plastic device and pressed the green answer button. I lifted it to my ear, but remained silent. Did you really think you could simply discard us, Alda? Sylvia's voice lacked the frantic theatrical panic from the driveway earlier that week. It lacked the fake sorrow she weaponized against Catherine's quiet dignity last night. Her tone was frigid, steady, and stripped of all pretense. It was the sound of a predator cornered and starving. "You are violating a court order," I whispered, my throat tight. "I will call the police." "Call them," she countered with a sharp, humorless laugh. "By the time a squad car navigates the coastal highway, the damage will be permanent." "We are not trying to sneak into your elegant little party. We are parked half a mile down the road near the public beach access, waiting for your guests to arrive at the main security gate." I gripped the edge of the marble sink. "What do you want?" "I want you to experience the exact same humiliation you inflicted upon us," she stated, her words dripping with venom. "You stripped us of our dignity. You threatened us with prison. You turned your sister into a social outcast. So, I made a phone call this morning. Do you remember Gary Vance?" The name hit me like a physical blow. Gary Vance operated an independent online gossip publication that fed on the scandals of Maui high society. He possessed zero journalistic integrity. He was a sleazy opportunist who thrived on publishing sensational rumors, ruined reputations, and scandalous divorces. If a prominent family had a dark secret, Gary Vance was the vulture circling overhead, waiting to print it. "Gary is sitting right next to me in the car," Sylvia continued, her voice buzzing through the cheap speaker. "He has his camera equipment ready. As soon as your wealthy in-laws and their elite friends start pulling up to the estate gates, your father and I are going to step out. We are going to grant an exclusive live interview. We are going to stand on public property and tell the world how our daughter abandoned her secret child at a rural medical clinic. We will explain how you stole our life savings and then filed a fake restraining order to silence us. You have no proof." I countered, my voice shaking. "Julian has the real documents. The truth is already documented. Truth does not matter on the internet." "Alda," she sneered, "Gary does not care about your corporate lawyers or your forensic accountants. He cares about clicks. He cares about the spectacle. Even if you prove us wrong next week, the headline will drop today. Your perfect wedding will become a tabloid circus. Your beautiful reception will be filled with whispers and horrified stares. Every single person sitting in those folding chairs will wonder if the bride is actually a monster. We will burn your sanctuary to ash before you even walk down the aisle." She disconnected the call. The dial tone hissed in my ear. The plastic phone slipped from my sweaty palm, clattering into the porcelain sink. The panic attack struck with ruthless efficiency. The marble walls of the bathroom seemed to contract, pressing inward. The air grew thin and unbreathable. My chest seized an iron band tightening around my ribs, restricting my lungs. I sank to the floor, the expensive silk of my bridal robe pooling around my knees. I pressed my hands flat against the cold tile, trying to ground myself, but the room spun in a dizzying, chaotic blur. Sylvia had found the ultimate loophole. The restraining order kept her off the property, but it could not prevent her from standing on a public sidewalk and screaming lies into a camera. She was going to intercept my guests. She was going to ambush Julian's colleagues, the resort executives, my closest friends. They would arrive dressed in their finest attire, expecting a celebration of love, and instead they would be greeted by a screaming woman wielding a fabricated scandal. The luxury estate would transform into a crime scene of public humiliation. I closed my eyes, fighting a wave of profound nausea. I spent my entire life avoiding conflict, making myself small to keep the peace. I built this beautiful, secluded life in Hawaii to escape their toxic reach. I thought the legal injunction was an impenetrable shield. But my mother was willing to destroy herself as long as she could drag me down into the ruins with her. I could call Julian. I could tell him to send his private security detail down to the public road, but security guards could not force a journalist to turn off a camera on a public street. A confrontation between men in dark suits and my screaming parents would only give the gossip reporter better footage. It would validate the chaos. I could stay hidden in this pristine suite, I could lock the door and wait for the storm to pass. I could let the rumors spread and spend my entire wedding reception explaining the rural clinic, the forged signature, the blackmail. I would spend my wedding day defending my right to exist. I opened my eyes. I looked up at the gilded mirror above the vanity. The woman staring back at me was pale, her carefully applied makeup contrasting with the sheer terror in her eyes. But as I stared at my reflection, the terror began to recede, replaced by a slow burning, resilient fire. I remembered the tearful 19-year-old girl paying her own tuition. I remembered the 22-year-old woman forced to ignore an insurance denial. I remembered the heavy duffel bag Julian packed when their lies nearly broke us. I had survived every single trap they set. I did not survive decades of psychological warfare just to cower on a bathroom floor on my wedding day. Hiding would make me a victim. It would prove that Sylvia still held the power to paralyze me with fear. I placed my palms flat against the tile and pushed myself up. My legs felt shaky, but I locked my knees and stood tall. I smoothed the wrinkles from my silk robe. I reached into the sink and picked up the cheap burner phone. I dropped it into the trash can alongside the torn photograph. I unlocked the bathroom door and stepped back into the bright sunlight of the bridal suite. My bridesmaids looked up, their smiles faltering as they registered the fierce, unyielding expression on my face. The makeup artist paused, holding a brush in midair. "I need my dress," I said, my voice steady and commanding. "The ceremony does not start for another 2 hours," my maid of honor whispered, looking confused. "I know," I replied, walking toward the garment bag hanging in the corner. "But there is something I have to handle before the guests arrive. And I am not going to do it hiding in a bathrobe." I was done playing defense. I was done relying on lawyers and security guards to fight my battles. If Sylvia and Richard wanted a spectacle at the gates, I was going to give them one. But it would be on my terms. I was going to walk down that driveway and face the monsters myself. I was going to end this permanently. I turned away from the mirror and walked toward the heavy canvas garment bag hanging in the corner of the suite. The ivory silk of my wedding gown whispered against the carpet as I unzipped the protective cover. The dress was a masterpiece of structural elegance designed to evoke both strength and grace. It featured a fitted bodice with delicate lace appliques and a sweeping train that trailed behind me like a liquid pearl. I stepped into the gown and my maid of honor quickly fastened the row of tiny pearl buttons, tracing the line of my spine. I did not ask for a veil. I wanted my face uncovered. I wanted my vision clear. I wanted the monsters waiting at the gates to look directly into my eyes when I ended their reign of terror. The luxury estate Julian and I had rented for the weekend was situated on a private bluff overlooking the rugged Maui coastline. The property was a fortress of tranquility, protected by a long winding driveway lined with ancient banyan trees and secured by heavy row iron gates. I walked out of the bridal suite, the heavy silk of my train gliding smoothly across the polished hardwood floors. My bridesmaids trailed behind me, their faces etched with concern, but I raised a hand, instructing them to stay back. This was a confrontation I had to face alone. As I descended the grand sweeping staircase into the main foyer, the heavy double-D doors of the estate swung open. A member of the private security team stepped inside, his expression grave. He wore a dark suit and an earpiece, his professional demeanor contrasting sharply with the chaotic news he delivered. He confirmed what Sylvia had threatened on the burner phone. Richard and Sylvia Lopez were standing on the public sidewalk just outside the main iron gates. They were not alone. A man carrying professional camera equipment and a microphone adorned with the logo of a notorious local gossip blog was pacing beside them. The security guard offered to contact the local authorities to disperse the crowd, citing loitering ordinances. He offered to summon Julianne to handle the situation. I shook my head, declining both options. Calling the police to clear a public sidewalk would only escalate the spectacle and give the gossip reporter the chaotic footage he craved. Sending Julian to negotiate with my parents would only validate their attempt to insert themselves into his narrative. They wanted to ruin my wedding. They wanted me to cower in fear while they shouted lies into a camera. I was not going to give them the satisfaction of a passive victory. I thanked the security guard and walked out the front door, stepping into the warm tropical sunlight. The air smelled of salt spray and blooming plumeria. The winding driveway stretched out before me, a long ribbon of crushed white gravel leading to the iron gates. I began the long walk down the driveway, the gravel crunching softly beneath my satin heels. The physical journey mirrored the psychological distance I had traveled over the past 32 years. Every step I took away from the pristine sanctuary of the estate and toward the chaotic threat waiting at the gates felt like a shedding of my old skin. I thought about the little girl who shrank into the background to avoid her mother's critical gaze. I thought about the teenager who worked 2 jobs to pay her own tuition while her parents funneled money into her sister's vanity. I thought about the young woman who accepted the heavy burden of the scapegoat role because she believed it was the only way to earn fragments of love. That version of Alda Lopez was gone. She had been systematically dismantled by their cruelty and resurrected by her own quiet, resilient strength. As I rounded the final bend in the driveway, the wrought iron gates came into view. Beyond the heavy black bars stood the architects of my misery. The visual contrast was striking. I stood on the pristine gravel, radiating calm authority in a stunning ivory gown. The sunlight caught the delicate lace, appliques casting a soft glow around my silhouette. On the other side of the gates, my parents looked desperate, bitter, and profoundly diminished. Sylvia wore a frantic, chaotic energy, her designer blouse wrinkled, her makeup harsh and unblended. Richard stood beside her, his posture slumped, his face pale and sweating under the Hawaiian sun. They looked like predators who had been starved of their power and were now reduced to scavenging for scraps of attention. Standing a few feet away from them was Gary Vance, the gossip reporter. He was a sleazy opportunist with greasy hair in a cheap, ill-fitting suit. He held a bulky digital camera mounted on a shoulder rig, the red recording light already blinking ominously. He was capturing the arrival of my affluent guests. His lens focused on the luxury vehicles pulling up to the security checkpoint. Sylvia spotted me first. Her eyes widened and a sharp, triumphant smile stretched across her face. She thought she had won. She thought my presence at the gates indicated a surrender. She believed I was walking down the driveway to beg for mercy, to offer them the extortion money they demanded just to keep the camera turned off. She elbowed Gary Vance, pointing a manicured finger in my direction. The reporter immediately pivoted, hoisting the heavy camera onto his shoulder and aiming the lens directly through the iron bars. He was ready to capture the tearful breakdown of a desperate bride. I did not break my stride. I did not alter my posture. I kept my chin high and my gaze locked entirely on Sylvia. I walked until I was standing just 2 feet away from the heavy iron gate, the thick metal bars separating my sanctuary from their chaos. Sylvia stepped forward, pressing her hands against the cold iron. Her smile was sharp and predatory. "Alda," she purred, her voice dripping with fake maternal concern, perfectly calibrated for the recording microphone. "We are so glad you decided to come out and face the truth. We were just about to tell Gary here the real story behind your sudden arrangement. We were about to explain why you abandoned your child at Poit's, that rural clinic 12 years ago." She paused, waiting for my reaction. She expected tears, she expected panic, she expected me to crumble under the threat of public exposure. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who spent my entire life trying to erase my worth. I looked at the camera lens staring blankly at my face. My expression remained completely devoid of fear. The terror that paralyzed me in the bathroom earlier was gone, replaced by a cold, absolute certainty. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not offer a desperate plea for silence. I looked Sylvia in the eyes and prepared to deliver the final devastating blow that would end her toxic reign over my life permanently. Sylvia gripped the black iron bars of the security gate. Her knuckles were stark white against the dark metal. She wore a tailored emerald pantsuit she likely purchased just for this occasion, intending to look formidable and wealthy on camera. Richard stood half a step behind her, wiping beads of sweat from his forehead with a monogrammed handkerchief. He looked like a man standing on a trapdoor waiting for the lever to pull. Beside them, Gary Vance hoisted his heavy digital camera onto his shoulder. The red recording light blinked in the bright morning sun. He pointed the lens through the gaps in the iron, framing my face against the lush tropical foliage of the estate driveway. I stopped 2 feet from the gate. The heavy ivory silk of my wedding gown settled around my satin heels. I did not cross my arms. I did not break eye contact. I let the silence stretch, forcing Sylvia to make the first move. "We are recording Alda." Sylvia announced, her voice pitched perfectly for the reporter's boom microphone. She adopted the sorrowful tone of a heartbroken matriarch. "I want you to look into this lens and explain to your new family why you left an infant at a rural clinic 12 years ago. I want you to explain why your father and I had to drain our retirement accounts to cover up your sociopathic mistakes." Gary Vance shifted his weight, leaning closer to the iron bars. He smelled like stale coffee and cheap cologne. He expected me to shield my face. He expected me to turn around and run crying back up the gravel driveway. "Tell them how you stole our savings to fund this lavish party," Sylvia continued, pointing a manicured finger at my dress. "Tell them how you hired corporate sharks to intimidate us with fake restraining orders just to keep your dark past hidden from your wealthy fiancé." She paused, waiting for my defense. She wanted a screaming match. She wanted me to hurl insults so she could capture footage of the unstable, erratic bride she claimed I was. She was starving for a reaction. I looked at her face. I studied the desperate calculation in her eyes. Then I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was a cold, sharp expression that contained zero empathy. It was the smile of a woman who had finally learned how to play chess against a predator. "You are reading from an outdated script, Sylvia," I said, keeping my tone conversational and low. "You think you are standing here holding a loaded weapon. You think exposing the clinic will destroy my life, but you are aiming at the wrong target." Sylvia frowned. Her confident posture wavered. The fake sorrow melted into genuine confusion. "What are you talking about?" she snapped, dropping the theatrical tone. "Julian is a very thorough man," I explained, taking a slow step closer to the gate. "When his legal team discovered you were paying hush money to the adoptive family, they did not just file a countersuit against you. They contacted the extortionists directly." Richard's head snapped up. The color drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly pale gray. He dropped his handkerchief. "Corporate litigators do not negotiate with blackmailers." I continued, my voice steady over the sound of the crashing ocean waves behind the estate. "Julian's team informed the adoptive parents that their decade of financial extortion was documented and heading to federal court. The adoptive family panicked. They hired their own defense counsel yesterday afternoon. To save themselves from prison, they surrendered all their communication records. They handed over every single wire transfer receipt, every threatening email, and every piece of evidence proving you forged my signature to protect Vanessa." Sylvia opened her mouth, but her vocal cords failed her. She stared at me, her eyes wide with mounting terror. "The secret is already out," I said, holding her gaze. "You have no leverage left. There is no hidden scandal to expose to this reporter because the federal authorities already possess the entire unredacted file. You brought a camera crew to a war that ended last night." Richard grabbed Sylvia's arm, his fingers digging into the emerald fabric of her suit. "We need to leave," he choked out, his voice a raspy whisper. "Sylvia, we have to go right now." Sylvia jerked her arm away. Her pride refused to let her retreat. She glared at me, her chest heaving. "You are bluffing," she hissed, stepping closer to the iron bars. "You are lying to protect your wedding. I will ruin you, Alda. I will stand on this sidewalk until every single guest hears what you did." "You are welcome to stand on that sidewalk," I replied. "But you are forgetting one critical detail about the emergency injunction a judge signed yesterday." I raised my hand and pointed a single finger toward the heavy stone pillars framing the iron gates. A bronze plaque mounted on the stone displayed the official address of the luxury estate. The temporary restraining order dictates you must remain 500 feet away from me and my residence. I stated, you decided to park your car down the road and walk up to the exact property line of my wedding venue. You thought standing on the public side of the gate offered you a legal loophole, but the injunction measures distance from my physical person. I took another deliberate step forward until the toe of my satin heel touched the iron track of the sliding gate. By walking down this driveway, I closed the gap. I whispered, you are currently standing 30 and away from a protected party. You are in direct, willful violation of a court order. The realization hit Richard like a physical blow. He stumbled backward, gripping the hood of Gary Vance's parked van for support. Sylvia froze. Her eyes darted from my face to the long stretch of the coastal highway behind her. She finally heard the sound. It was not a siren. It was the low, heavy rumble of high-performance engines rolling down the asphalt. 2 police cruisers glided around the bend of the coastal road. Their light bars flashed in a silent rhythmic pattern of brilliant red and blue, reflecting off the polished iron bars of the security gate. The cruisers angled their heavy frames, blocking Gary Vance's van and sealing my parents against the stone perimeter wall. 4 uniformed officers stepped out of the vehicles. They did not look hurried or panicked. They moved with the calm, definitive authority of law enforcement executing a prearranged warrant. Julian had alerted the local precinct an hour ago, providing them with the active restraining order and the GPS coordinates of the estate. The trap was set long before I zipped up my wedding gown. Sylvia backed away from the gate, her hands raised in a frantic, trembling gesture. "Officers, there is a misunderstanding," she cried out, reverting to her fake, fragile persona. "We are just trying to see our daughter on her wedding day. She is unwell. We are trying to help her." The lead officer, a tall man with a stern face, pulled a folded document from his utility belt. "Sylvia Lopez and Richard Lopez," he announced, his voice cutting through the humid morning air. "You are in violation of an active protective order. Place your hands behind your backs." Richard did not argue. The fight drained out of him. He turned around and placed his hands on the hood of the news van, hanging his head in absolute defeat. An officer stepped forward, retrieving a pair of steel handcuffs. The metallic ratcheting sound echoed loudly on the quiet street. Sylvia refused to comply. She backed into the stone pillar, shaking her head wildly. "No!" she screamed, her emerald suit wrinkling as she thrashed against the officer, reaching for her arm. "You cannot arrest me. I am a prominent member of this community. I am the victim here. Elda, tell them to stop." I stood behind the iron bars, my posture perfect, my expression unreadable. I watched the officer grip her wrists and secure the heavy steel cuffs behind her back. I did not speak a single word of mercy. Gary Vance stood near the bumper of his van, watching the scene unfold. He was a parasite who fed on the destruction of the elite. He came here expecting to capture the tearful breakdown of a humiliated bride. He expected a story about a secret teenage pregnancy. But as a bride with a rumored past was a mild scandal. 2 wealthy, prominent socialites getting arrested in their formal wear for extortion and violating a restraining order outside a luxury wedding venue was a viral sensation. It was front-page gold. Gary Vance did not turn his camera off. He hoisted the heavy rig higher on his shoulder. He pivoted the lens away from the iron gate and aimed it directly at my mother. He zoomed in on her face, capturing the smeared mascara, the panicked eyes, and the undeniable reality of her arrest. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his smartphone, tapping the screen to initiate a live broadcast to his gossip publication. "Stop filming me!" Sylvia shrieked, struggling against the officer's grip. "Turn that camera off! You parasite! We paid you to be here!" Gary ignored her, framing the shot to include Richard being searched against the police cruiser. The elite reputation Sylvia had guarded with ruthless cruelty. The facade she had sacrificed my identity to protect was burning to the ground in real time. Thousands of people across the island were receiving live notifications on their phones. Her country club friends, her neighbors, her extended relatives. They were all watching her being hauled away like a common criminal. The officers guided Sylvia toward the back of the second cruiser. She looked over her shoulder, locking eyes with me one final time. There was no fake sorrow left. There was only raw, unadulterated hatred. I met her gaze, holding it steady until the officer pushed her head down and guided her into the back seat of the squad car. The heavy door slammed shut, sealing her inside. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated the white gravel of the driveway. I turned my back to the street. The heavy iron gates remained locked and secure. The immediate threat was neutralized. The monsters were banished. But the day was far from over. The wedding ceremony awaited me at the top of the bluff, and the final piece of poetic justice regarding their financial ruin was yet to be delivered. I gathered the silk train of my gown and began the long, victorious walk back up the driveway. The white gravel crunching under my heels sounded like a steady, rhythmic drumbeat, marking the end of a long, grueling war. I turned my back on the flashing lights of the police cruisers. I did not look over my shoulder to watch the squad cars pull away from the curb. The heavy iron gates of the estate stood tall and unyielding behind me, acting as a physical barrier, separating my new reality from the toxic wreckage of my past. The tropical morning air felt distinctly different now. It was no longer thick with impending dread. It smelled of blooming plumeria and fresh sea salt. The heavy silk train of my ivory gown swept across the stones, erasing my previous footprints. I passed the towering banyan trees, their thick roots anchoring them firmly to the earth. For the first time in 32 years, I felt similarly grounded. I reached the grand mahogany doors of the estate. My bridesmaids were waiting in the expansive marble foyer. Their faces were pale, etched with deep concern. My maid of honor rushed forward, inspecting my dress for dirt or damage. She asked if we needed to delay the ceremony, fearing I was too distressed to proceed. I shook my head and told her the schedule remained unchanged. The schedule belonged to me now. My life belonged to me. I stepped into the bridal suite to touch up my makeup, but my reflection in the gilded mirror required no adjustments. My eyes were bright and clear. The lingering shadows of lifelong anxiety had evaporated in the harsh sunlight at the gates. A soft knock echoed through the room. Julian entered. He wore his tailored linen suit, looking regal and steady. He did not ask for a play-by-play of the arrest. He did not ask if I was crying. He simply looked at my face and understood that the final threat was permanently neutralized. He took my hands in his. His palms were warm and reassuring. He told me the string quartet was taking their places on the oceanfront bluff and the guests were seated. He kissed my forehead and went to wait at the altar. The ceremony space was a breathtaking vision of floral architecture. Hundreds of imported white orchids draped over a natural wooden arch, framing the endless blue expanse of the Pacific Ocean. The gentle sea breeze caused the delicate petals to flutter in a soft, rhythmic dance. When the musicians began to play the processional melody, I stepped out onto the manicured green grass. I did not have a father to walk me down the aisle. Growing up, I often wondered how I would endure that traditional moment, knowing Richard Lopez viewed me as a burden rather than a beloved daughter. He always threatened to withhold his financial blessing unless I married someone who elevated his country club status. I used to imagine the long walk, feeling empty, awkward, and steeped in public shame. But as I took my first step toward the altar, I felt an overwhelming sense of profound power. Walking alone was not a symbol of abandonment. It was a fierce declaration of independence. The guest stood turning toward me with genuine smiles. I saw Catherine's eyes glistening with unshed tears of joy. William offered a respectful, supportive nod. They were witnessing the birth of a new family structure. I reached the altar and took Julian's hands. The officiant spoke beautiful, resonant words about partnership resilience and chosen bonds. He spoke about building a sanctuary out of mutual trust. As the ceremony neared its conclusion, the officiant motioned toward a small wooden table holding a crisp legal document and a silver fountain pen. It was time to formalize the union. I walked over to the table and picked up the heavy silver pen. The metal felt cool and solid against my skin. I looked down at the marriage license resting on the polished wood. The official state seal gleamed in the bright sunlight. 12 years ago, my parents stole my name. They carried my identification into a shadowy rural clinic, paying cash to bypass the law. They forged my signature on private adoption surrender forms, binding me to a medical lie without my consent. They weaponized my identity to shield Vanessa from the consequences of her actions. They used ink and paper to build a cage around my future. Now I was holding the pen. I pressed the silver nib against the thick parchment. I signed my name with deliberate sweeping strokes. The ink flowed dark and permanent. This signature was authentic. It was a willing, joyful choice. I was legally severing my ties to the Lopez name and adopting a new future. I set the pen down. Julian signed his name right beside mine. We traded a forged toxic past for a legally binding sanctuary. The officiant pronounced us husband and wife. The applause that erupted across the oceanfront bluff was deafening. The reception that followed was flawless. We dined under a canopy of stars, listening to the ocean waves crash against the steep cliffs below. There were no whispered rumors among the tables. There was no tabloid spectacle ruining the toasts. Gary Vance, the sleazy reporter, was too busy uploading his viral footage of the affluent country club elite getting shoved into squad cars to care about my floral arrangements. My guests danced until midnight, entirely unaware of the darkness that tried to breach the gates earlier that morning. It was a celebration of pure, unadulterated survival. As I reflect back on that perfect evening months later, I can finally explain the beautiful mechanics of the justice that followed. When Julian's corporate litigators filed the countersuit for identity theft and financial extortion, they did not play games. They moved with predatory efficiency. My parents believed they were untouchable because they hid their remaining assets behind complex shell companies and offshore trusts. But forensic accountants possess a unique talent for unearthing buried treasure. During the discovery phase of the civil lawsuit, the legal team subpoenaed decades of banking records. They tracked every single hush money payment made to the adoptive family over the last 10 years. They proved beyond any reasonable doubt that Richard and Sylvia committed egregious medical fraud and identity theft to cover up the clinic incident. The judge presiding over the civil case was ruthless. The evidence presented was irrefutable. To avoid federal prison time for the medical fraud and the blatant violation of the restraining order, my parents were forced to settle the civil extortion lawsuit out of court. The financial penalty was staggering. The court ordered them to liquidate their remaining hidden retirement accounts. The money they hoarded while forcing me to work 2 grueling jobs just to pay my college tuition was seized. Their luxury cars were sold to satisfy the legal fees. Their prestigious country club memberships were revoked due to the viral arrest video. They were bled dry by the very justice system they tried to manipulate. The poetic justice was not merely their bankruptcy. It was the specific routing of the settlement funds. When my mother called me 2 weeks before my wedding, she demanded $40,000. She ordered me to cancel my celebration so she could pay off her blackmailers. She claimed I did not deserve a party if I refused to serve her needs. When the civil settlement finalized, Julian's lawyers transferred the seized retirement funds directly into our primary checking account. The final payout was substantial. Julian sat at his mahogany desk, holding the final bank ledger. He smiled, his analytical mind appreciating the perfect symmetry of the numbers. The funds extracted from my parents' ruined estate covered the precise total cost of our luxury destination wedding down to the last imported white orchid. They tried to cancel my joy to save their reputation. Instead, they financed the most beautiful day of my life. 6 months have passed since the heavy iron gates of the luxury estate closed on my old life. Maui is a small island, and the elite social circles are microscopic, governed by unwritten rules of prestige and public image. Richard and Sylvia Lopez are no longer invited to the charity galas they once ruled. Their names were quietly scrubbed from the exclusive country club registry the exact week the viral video of their arrest began circulating across local news feeds. They were forced to downsize, selling the sprawling colonial house where I spent my childhood walking on eggshells. They moved into a cramped, outdated condominium complex in Kihei. I hear through the resort grapevine that my father spends his days sitting on a narrow concrete lay, staring blankly at a shared asphalt parking lot instead of the pristine green fairways he used to dominate. My mother no longer shops at the high-end designer boutiques in Viuli. The few times she has been spotted at the local grocery store, she keeps her head down, hiding behind large sunglasses, actively avoiding the piercing stares of women who used to covet her dinner party invitations. They built their entire existence on the fragile, shallow foundation of public perception. When that foundation crumbled under the weight of their own criminal extortion, they were left with nothing. They are trapped in a quiet, isolated prison of their own making, serving a life sentence of social exile. You might expect that such a spectacular downfall would bring a family closer together in shared misery. But toxic systems do not breed loyalty. They breed self-preservation. Vanessa did not step up to support them in their ruin. The golden child was meticulously conditioned to receive resources, never to provide them. When Preston canceled their lavish engagement and my parents' luxury funds officially dried up, Vanessa turned her wrath toward the architects of her privilege. She packed her remaining designer luggage and boarded a flight to the mainland, severing all contact with Richard and Sylvia. She blames them entirely for her public humiliation, ignoring the fact that their crimes were committed solely to protect her secret. She refuses to acknowledge her own role in the decade of lies. She currently lives in a rented apartment in Los Angeles, posting heavily filtered photos on social media, pretending to maintain a glamorous lifestyle. But the captions read like desperate hollow pleas for external validation. She traded one illusion for another, forever running from a truth she lacks the courage to face. The golden child remains a captive to her own entitlement, isolated in a different kind of cage, incapable of building a genuine connection. My reality looks drastically different today. This morning, I woke up to the rhythmic sound of ocean waves rolling against the shore outside our bedroom window. The digital clock on the nightstand read 8. Julian was already awake. I walked out to the kitchen and found him brewing rich Kona coffee, the aroma filling the bright sunlit space. The sliding glass doors were pushed wide open, allowing the cool tropical breeze to sweep through the house. Catherine and William Sterling arrived shortly after 9, carrying a woven basket filled with fresh pastries from a local bakery down the street. There was no tense, frantic preparation for their arrival. I did not have to police my tone, monitor my posture, or prepare a defense for my life choices. I wore a simple linen robe and greeted my in-laws with genuine, relaxed embraces. We sat on the lei for hours. William taught Julian a complex new chess strategy, their laughter echoing across the patio. Catherine and I discussed the floral designs for an upcoming charity event I was coordinating at the resort. When I offered a creative suggestion regarding the centerpieces, Catherine listened intently, validating my expertise. She did not interrupt me. She did not redirect the conversation back to her own achievements or criticize my vision. She simply smiled, took a sip of her coffee, and told me she admired my talent. In that small, quiet interaction, I felt the profound healing warmth of a family that actually chose me. They do not demand sacrifices to prove my loyalty. They do not view my boundaries as an act of war or a personal insult. They offer a safe harbor, a place where I am allowed to exist without conditions, without fear, and without the constant pressure of earning my keep. I am sitting on the edge of my lei now, looking out at the endless blue horizon, and I want to talk directly to you. If you are listening to this and you recognize the pattern, if you feel the familiar ache of being the outcast in your own home, I need you to hear these words. In toxic family systems, the roles are assigned early and they are ruthless. The golden child is elevated, protected, and insulated from the consequences of their own actions. They are groomed to serve as the flawless reflection of the parent's fragile ego. But that pedestal requires a sturdy foundation of sacrifice to remain standing. That is where the scapegoat comes in. If you are the scapegoat, you are the designated shock absorber for every dysfunction, failure, and resentment in the household. You are labeled difficult, overly sensitive, or dramatic simply because you refuse to swallow the lies they serve for dinner. You spend your entire life bending over, backward, trying to earn a seat at a table where the game is permanently rigged against you. You shrink your personality. You hand over your hard-earned resources. And you accept the blame for storms you did not create, hoping that one day your endless compliance will be rewarded with a fraction of genuine love. It will never happen. You cannot earn love from people who view you as a utility. Their affection is a transaction, and the price is your sanity. Setting a firm boundary is not an act of betrayal. It is the fundamental baseline of survival. When you finally say no, they will call you selfish. They will mount aggressive smear campaigns and recruit extended relatives to guilt you back into submission. Let them spin their false narratives. Let them play the victim. Your worth is not defined by their inability to value you. Walking away from the people who share your DNA is the most terrifying journey you will ever embark upon. But it is also the ultimate act of self-preservation. You have the unalienable right to build your own sanctuary. You have the right to surround yourself with people who celebrate your presence rather than exploiting your patience. I found my sanctuary, and I promise you yours is waiting on the other side of your fear. Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic family member to save yourself? Share your boundary-setting stories in the comments below. I read every single one. If my journey resonated with you today, please subscribe to Luke Revenge Start and hit the like button so we can help more people find the courage to choose themselves. There is a certain mythology woven into the fabric of the traditional American family, a picturesque ideal of white picket fences, holiday gatherings, and unconditional love. We are conditioned from a young age to believe that blood is thicker than water and that the bond between parent and child is an unbreakable sanctuary. But what happens when that sanctuary is built on a foundation of lies, favoritism, and emotional exploitation? The stories we have explored, tales of daughters erased, exploited, and ultimately pushed to the brink, force us to confront a deeply uncomfortable truth about parenting, responsibility, and the generational trauma that fears behind closed doors. In the heart of these family tragedies lies a toxic psychological dynamic that destroys the very essence of childhood, the rigid casting of the golden child and the scapegoat. In a healthy family structure, parents guide their children with fairness, holding them accountable for their mistakes while loving them equally. But in dysfunctional systems, one child is elevated to a pedestal, shielded from consequences and showered with endless attention and resources. This golden child becomes the vessel for the parent's ego. Their mistakes covered up at any cost, even if it means forging documents, emptying college funds, or outright lying to protect a pristine public image. Conversely, the scapegoat is forced to carry the crushing weight of the family's dysfunctions. They are the child whose needs are consistently deprioritized. They learn devastatingly early that their worth is not inherent, but rather measured by how useful they are to others. They become the acceptable sacrifice when the golden child's comfort or the family's reputation is at stake. They are expected to be the quiet helper, the one who cleans up the messes, the one who is treated like free help rather than a beloved member of the household. This dynamic is a profound failure of family responsibility. It teaches the golden child that they are above the law, breeding a fragile entitlement that collapses the moment they face the real world. And it teaches the scapegoat that love is a transaction, a debt they must continuously pay but can never fully settle. True parenting requires a bedrock of honesty, fairness, and acute emotional awareness. It demands the courage to let children fail and learn, rather than orchestrating elaborate criminal cover-ups to preserve a country club facade. When parents choose their own comfort and social standing over the emotional safety of their children, they do not just fail as guides. They become predators. They create an environment where a child spends decades shrinking themselves to fit into a mold, swallowing their hurt, and apologizing for having feelings. This is not guidance. It is emotional suffocation. In American culture, where independence and self-worth are highly championed, The betrayal stings even deeper when the very people tasked with nurturing those qualities are the ones actively destroying them. The profound lesson hidden within these shattered family portraits is the agonizing but necessary realization that biology does not equate to obligation. For years, a child might spend their life trying to earn love from people who were never going to give it. They might endure public humiliation, skipped graduations, and canceled birthdays, constantly wondering why they are never enough. But the turning point always arrives, a moment of crystal clear realization that the problem was never the child. It was the parents who lacked the capacity to love fiercely and fairly. When that realization dawned, the concept of family fundamentally shifts. The scapegoat stops waiting for the parents to love them the way they need and stops shrinking to fit into their distorted expectations. They discover the liberating truth that setting boundaries is not an act of revenge, nor is it a betrayal. It is the ultimate act of survival. It is the recognition that a person cannot pour from an empty cup and that people who truly love you will never ask you to. This journey of walking away from toxicity leads to the beautiful, redemptive discovery of the chosen family. Family is not merely blood or shared DNA. Family consists of the people who show up for you, who see you crying alone at a table and invite you to join theirs. It is the mentors, the friends, and the partners who validate your worth without requiring you to earn it through silent suffering. The law and the heart both recognize that true family can be created, not just inherited. Raising children in today's world means recognizing that our words and actions become their inner voice. If we raise them with deceit, condition our love on their utility, or sacrifice one to save the other, we doom them to a lifetime of rebuilding their fractured souls. But if we raise them with unwavering emotional awareness, if we teach them that their voice matters, that they are seen, and that they will never have to earn our love, we equip them to build a world rooted in genuine empathy. We must promise our children that they will never have to wonder if they are wanted. They will always know. These stories of heartbreak, courage, and ultimate liberation are not just cautionary tales. They are roadmaps for anyone who has ever felt invisible in their own home. If you have navigated the treacherous waters of family toxicity, if you have had to build your own sanctuary from the ashes of the one you were born into, your story matters. We want to hear from you. Share your own boundary-setting stories in the comments below. And if this journey of healing and reclaiming your power resonates with you, please take a moment to subscribe to the Family Karma Stories channel and like this video so we can continue to bring these powerful truths to light. As we look at the families we came from and the families we are building, we are left with a haunting, quiet question. The past cannot be rewritten, and the wounds of childhood often ache long into our adult lives. We pack away the old photographs, we lock the heavy iron gates, and we walk into the bright, clear future we have carved for ourselves. But as the sun sets and the house grows quiet, we must ask ourselves, have we truly broken the cycle, leaving the ghosts of our ancestors behind? Or are the shadows of the past merely resting, waiting for us to decide what kind of legacy we will leave for the children who come next? The choice ultimately lies in the silence between our heartbeats.